Peace be upon you. So, in the study of Hadith, there are biographies which are known as Ilm al Rijal, the science of narrators, or science of men to be more precise. And these are considered crucial for assessing the reliability and credibility of Hadith transmitters. These biographies, they provide detailed information about the lives, characters, trustworthiness of individuals in the chain of narrators, the isnad of the Hadith. Today, these biographical dictionaries are used to confirm a hadith's authenticity by assessing the reliability of each narrator in the chain. Scholars they categorize the individuals, these narrators, based on if they're trustworthy, if they're weak, or if they're known or unknown. And based on the information provided, they're going to grade the hadiths accordingly. The biographies, they aim to provide historical context and insights into the narrator's lives and conditions and are foundational in Hadith sciences. So they're supposed to tell you, when the person was born, when they died, which town they resided in. And from this, they're supposed to extract, did these people meet? Did they transmit from one another? And such and such. Most people, they assume that the biographies came first and then these notable compilations, collections of hadith with their respective gradings came afterwards. But this is actually not the case. Historically, the hadith compilations were first produced, and then later, the biographies were created to justify the claims of the hadith compilers. Or, if we put it another way, the biographical information came after the compilation of the hadith, and it was derived from the hadith itself. So this is a classic putting the cart before the horse. One would think that first the biographies came out, and then from that they were able to grade the hadith and determine if they're reliable or not. But that wasn't what happened. So we can determine this by first looking at the dates of the biographies that we have. So the oldest biography that I could find that still exists today is written by Ibn Sa'd. And this is Kitab al-Tabaqat al-Kabir. And it's believed to have been published or completed in 845 CE or 230 Hijra. And this has biographies on what's claimed as thousands of individuals. The first two books is a prophetic biography. Then books 3 and 4 contain biographies on the companions of Muhammad. Book 5, 6, and 7 are biographies of later Islamic scholars, and Book 8 contains biographies on Islamic women. So this is considered, to be potentially the oldest biography we have, and it was written 230 years after Hijrah. So roughly 220 years after the death of the Prophet. The next one is from Bukhari. So Bukhari died in 870. And it's understood that he wrote Tarikh al-Kabir, is a book of biographies, around the year 866, and this is 252 years after Hijrah. And this contains originally 12,300 men, with no mention of women, but later editions, they included the names of women, and it's up to 40,000 biographies. But it's interesting that, when Bukhari first wrote this, it was only men, it was only 12,300, and again, the date of completion is 866. And what we're going to see is these dates, all of them, are very spotty. They don't know definitively when these works were completed and compiled. There's, ambiguity there. So we're seeing a theme that after 200 plus years, these biographies start coming on the scene. And then we have Al-Razi. He wrote his biography. It contains about 9,000 individuals. He completed this, it's estimated, around the year 938 or 325 years after Hijrah. And it just goes further from there. We see the next one. This is Ibn Adi. The year of completion was 976 Common Era, 365 years after Hijrah. And then we get to Al-Dabi. This was written or completed in 1347 Common Era, or 748 years after Hijrah. So at this point, the likeliness of these individuals being able to go back retroactively and determine the credibility of the people who preceded them, it diminishes with time. They're not going to have more information, they're going to have less information. So the biographies came after the Hadith compilations, and we can determine this because if you look at the Kitab as-Sitta, these are the six revered books of Sunni Islam. The earliest one we have, and there's a debate between who wrote theirs first, Muslim or Bukhari, we see that these were published in the 9th and 10th century. So Bukhari, he died in 870 CE or 256. Muslim, he died in 875 or 261 after Hijrah. Abu Dawood, he was 888 Common Era or 275 after Hijrah. And so these people, they basically compiled their works before the proliferation of the Hadith biographies, Ilm al-Rijal. In these biographies, they're meant to understand a couple things. One is the integrity, the credibility of the narrator. So it's going to look at their integrity, their accuracy, their consistency, the conformity with other reliable narrators, so they're going to compare and contrast, and then the reputation among scholars. The irony is that the Hadith compilers and the biographers made these determinations post facto, hundreds of years after the narrator's death. While the Hadith compilers had to do this based on Hadith selections, later biographies would use the Hadith compilers' selections and the content of the Hadith to try to retroactively confirm what the Hadith compilers provided them. So you have the Hadith compilers, they say, hey, look, we have these set of Hadith, here's the chain of narrators, we vouch that these narrators are sound, and then you have later generations going and saying, okay, well, they vouch that they're sound, can we determine that they're sound? And they create these biographies post facto to confirm what the Hadith compilers presented to them. So this seems very circular. People claim that the Hadiths are sound. They give a chain of narrators. The people who receive them say, okay, well, these narrators are sound, so we're going to basically fabricate, in essence, a justification for the soundness of these people. And additionally, these individuals didn't have a database that they can go compare and contrast hundreds of thousands of reports. According to Bukhari's own biography, it claims that he went through 10 million hadith. So these people had to do it off memory and intuition. They didn't have the sophistication we do today to go and say, hey, let me pull up every narration of this supposed report and do a compare and contrast and see how this person, conducts themselves across all the different hadith that they're part of the chain for. So most of this was done, again, by memory and intuition, completely unreliable. But the other main facet of the earliest biographies was to determine basically when were they born and when did they die? What was their age and where did they reside? And this is what most the earliest Hadith compilers were interested in, both Muslim and Bukhari. They wanted to know, basically, were two people contemporaries? And Bukhari took it one step further and wanted to know that they actually resided in the same location during a time period. So he was very interested to know that. He wasn't looking at the quote-unquote credibility, at least from what we can tell from his actual reports, his actual writings, not what people are attributing to him post facto. So what source are they using to make these determinations? Lo and behold, it's the Hadith Isnad itself. So they're looking at the Hadith Isnad and they're saying, okay, well, this person narrated from this person. They resided, therefore it must be at this location, and they must be, corresponding in age as far as contemporaries. So a lot of this is assumed, and it's obvious because the dates on the birth and death of individuals is all over the map. And I'm not talking about just the obscure individuals within a chain. Look at some of the most prominent individuals within Muslim history. That there's a wide discrepancy regarding their age. When were they born? When did they die? How old were they when they died? So because the ages of the narrators are generally inferred from the Isnad, their ages are highly speculative. This is why there are often wide estimates of what year someone was born and how old they were when they died. Even for the most notable figures of Hadith, this information is highly subjective. This is not limited to even relatively unknown transmitters. There's much uncertainty regarding the exact dates of birth and death of many of the most prominent individuals, including the Prophet's wife Aisha. The infamous Hadith transmitter, Zuhri, It's unclear, again, how old he was. When was he born? How old was he when he started transmitting these hadith? How old was he when he died? There's, big discrepancy there. And also Imam Malik, right, the writer of the Muwatta, again, uncertainty to how old he was, when he was born, how old he was when he died. Even the companions, Abu Bakr, Umar, or the Prophet himself, you can look at the hadith narrations, and as far as their age, how old they were when they died, the hadith is all over the map on this. And if the history is unclear for such notable individuals, how less reliable should we consider it for the multitude of individuals listed in the Isnad? Additionally, the Isnad does not provide the year and age of the narrator when they narrated the report. In Hadith sciences, the age requirement for reliable transmitters of Hadith is that they should have reached the age of maturity and intellectual competence. This typically means they should be mentally mature and capable of understanding and accurately transmitting the Hadith. The exact age at which one is considered mature can vary in different contexts and among scholars, but generally aligns with the age at which one is considered an adult in their society. Except what they used to do is when someone would be transmitting, their collection of hadith, they would have books where individuals would write their names to claim that yes, they were authorized recipients of this tradition. And this often included the names of children as long as they said that they were above the age of 5. In the book Studies in Hadith Methodology and Literature by M.M. Azami, it reads, people began to bring even their infants to the lectures on Hadith. The attendance of a child at such lectures entitled him to a certificate which gave him the name of the child if he was under 5, as proof that he attended the lectures. But if the child was 5 or more, it was mentioned in the certificate that he learned certain books from certain scholars. This practice, according to which a child of 5 years was awarded a certificate of matriculation or graduation in Hadith, sounds like a joke. But as a matter of fact, the case is not so ridiculous as it seems, and the practice was not as silly as it may appear to be. I can't imagine how, editors or even himself, he was writing this and thought that this came off, sounding sophisticated, calling such practices ridiculous and silly as it appears. So he acknowledges this is a silly, ridiculous practice, and he just wants to brush it away as if, no, there's nothing to see here. But aside from the ridiculousness of such practices, as stated, this poses a more practical problem. It is one thing to know that the transmitter is only 5 years old. It's another when it's unclear if the transmitter was a child or an adult when they originally heard the hadith. It's very likely that someone might have heard the hadith when they were a child and not of sound mind, but later on be taught the hadith at an older age, but make their isnad remove that intermediary. So for example, Abdul Razak was an 8th century Yemeni hadith scholar who compiled a collection of hadith. When he died in the year 211 after Hijrah at the age of 80, his student who transmitted his work was no more than 7 years old. And there's speculation that it was actually his father who taught him, at an older age, and they just use his name to, again, shorten that isnad. And it shows that they're going loosey-goosey with basically these hadith transmitters to make the chains appear smaller. And another common practice was that of ijazah, which is the permission for transmission. According to the book Hadith Muhammad's Legacy in Medieval and Modern World by Jonathan Brown, it states that ijazah for transmission meant that instead of reading an entire hadith collection in the presence of an authorized transmitter, a student might only read part of it and receive permission from the teacher to transmit the rest. Although it was a less rigorous form of authentication, ijazah still provided scholars with isnads for books. Although this practice existed in some forms even in the 9th century, by the mid-1000s, it had become very common. Al-Hakim al-Nayasburi, author of the massive Mustadrak, thus gave a group of students an ijazah to transmit his work provided they could secure well-written copies of them. Of course, if you could get an ijazah for a book you had not actually read in the presence of a teacher, you could get ijazahs for any number of books that the teacher was able to transmit. This led to the practice of acquiring a general ijazah for all the books a teacher had. In the 1000s, many scholars also accepted the practice of getting ijazahs from teachers one had not actually met at all through writing letters. This ijazah for the non-present person meant that scholars could acquire ijazahs for their infant children or even for children not yet born. So to summarize, it was a common practice that you would get permission to transmit the works of someone else that you haven't met, you haven't studied under. And then on top of that, not only can you get permission for, their books, you can get permission for the books that they have permission to do the same thing too. And then not only can you get permission for yourself, you can get permission for your children or your children who haven't even been born yet. So you can see how this whole practice, as far as looking at the isnad and determining the age of the individual, is highly unreliable. So today, they constantly are pointing towards ilm al-Rijal, saying that, hey, this is how we know that the individuals in this chain of narrators are reliable, except they're using the hadith themselves to make those determinations. And when you got this, funny business that's going on behind the scenes as far as who these narrators are, how old they were, what their credibility is, did they actually study under that individual, you realize there is no credibility there. We have hundreds of years of gap between these biographies being formulated and these individuals actually living. So all this, and again, it's based on the hadith itself. And we'll see that even Bukhari, he did not use his biography to make his Sahih Hadith, that the Sahih Hadith came before the biography that he made. So for background, Bukhari is considered the most revered book by Sunni Muslims after the Quran. They consider the second most authentic book. And Bukhari, he was from 810 to 870, so he died in the year 256 after Hijrah. Some sources, they claim that Bukhari wrote his Tarikh al-Kabir, this is his book of biographies, before his Sahih compilation Hadith. But this does not match the dates associated with each publication. So historically, Sahih Bukhari was compiled over a period of 16 years, starting from the year 831 Common Era or 216 Hijri, when Imam Bukhari was only 22 years old. The compilation was completed in roughly 16 years, around the year 846 Common Era, 231 Hijri. Then, roughly 20 years later, around the year 866 or 252 Hijri, he completed his Tarikh al-Kabir, which contained his biographies. So this shows that first he wrote his Sahih, then some 20 years later, he wrote his biography. And there's some discrepancy regarding exactly when these books were published, which is just funny in itself. You have biographies and they can't tell you when these works were completed. So I want to look at the facts to show that irrespective of the exact date, historically, it's very clear that first he wrote his Sahih compilation. He determined that all these chains were Sahih, that they were authentic, that they met each other, but then only post facto, he created his book of biographies. So if you look through his Sahih Bukhari, nowhere in his Sahih does he reference the work of Tarikh al-Kabir, his book of biographies. Yet if you look at Tarikh al-Kabir, there is a potential reference to his Sahih. On page 21 of the book by Muntazir Zaman entitled The Textual Integrity of Sahih al-Bukhari, he states, in Al-Tarikh al-Kabir, al-Bukhari directs readers to his book Al-Musnad, and another book titled Al-Mukhtasar. Both labels are found in what later became the standard title of Sahih, Al-Jami al-Musnad al-Sahih al-Mukhtasar. So here, Bukhari is potentially pointing out two references to his Sahih during the writing of his Tarikh. But Zaman says that there is some possible holes in this logic, so it really comes down to the dates. And according to most sources, they say that Bukhari completed his Sahih in the year 846 CE, or 231 years after Hijrah. So, according to the scholar Christopher Melchert, in his article Bukhari and Early Hadith Criticism, written in the Journal of American Oriental Society in 2001, he puts the date of the Tariq at 866 CE, or 252 after Hijrah. And it reads, as for the dating of the Tariq, the latest expressed date I have come across, is 252 after Hijrah. A substantial number of transmitters in the Sahih post-deceased Bukhari, but I have not found any of their names in Tariq. Again, this indicates that the Tariq came after the Sahih. Altogether, the evidence seems to be consistent with Bukhari having assembled the Tariq and about the size and form in which we have it. However, the present text shows some rearrangement and probably extensive correction by later transmitters. And I'm just going to jump ahead to this other quote. It says, it seems impossible that Tariq should have been deduced from the Sahih, or even from all of Bukhari's Hadith collections together. So that's one date from Melchert. If you go back to the book, The Textual Integrity of Sahih Bukhari, Zaman gives the date of 860, 246 Hijri. So either date you use, you're still after, roughly 20 years after the completion of the Sahih. And according to the book, The Canonization of Bukhari and Muslim by Jonathan Brown, he states that he, Bukhari, began his Tariq al-Kabir, the Great History, while a young man in Medina. The extant work is a massive biographical dictionary of over 12,300 entries. He is reported to have revised it at least 3 times over the course of his life. As Christopher Melchert corroborates in his analysis of the Tariq, al-Bukhari consistently provides neither full names nor evaluations of persons in question, focusing instead on locating each subject within the vast network of Hadith transmission. The Tariq seems to have no connection to the Sahih. If we read the abstract by Christopher Melchert in his article Bukhari and the Early Hadith Criticism, it reads, suggests that Al-Tariq al-Kabir was one of Bukhari's last works. So both of them are consistently saying that, look, this is the last things that he worked on before his death, subject to some correction and rearrangement after his death. It cannot have been retrospectively derived from Bukhari's Sahih, as Calder thought, yet neither can it have been the basis of the Sahih, for it omits to mention 14% of the men in the Sahih and mentions personal evaluations of only 6% of all its subjects. Its principal function seems to have been to identify traditionists by name. So nowhere in his Tariq is he actually giving evaluations of the credibility of his people. This is a work that he created post facto to just assess, okay, did these people live, what their names were, where they resided from, and none of this was used for his compilation of his Sahih, meaning that he came up with his Sahih himself. He did not use ilm Rijal to determine his Sahih. He determined that for whatever reason, based on his intuition, his memory, yes, these people are credible, and then he includes them in his compilation, and then only later creates this kind of partial biography that seems to have no connection whatsoever with his Sahih. So individuals who think that first he created the biography and then he created their Sahih are just fundamentally mistaken. These compilations of biographies did not come to fruition until hundreds of years later. Most of these hundreds of years after the death of Bukhari himself, where people retrospectively come back and try to create these biographies to fill these holes, giving the reports, were they credible, were they of sound mind and whatnot. But this is not what the compilations themselves were founded on. So from what we can tell, the Hadith compilers collected large volumes of Hadith and sourced them for their works without the use of any biographies. Then later generations used the chain of narrators, the isnad, from these hadith to extrapolate who lived in what time period and supposedly met with whom, and that the hadith contents, the matan, to determine the narrator's trustworthiness for their reports. So compilers create hadith. The hadith has 2 components. It has the isnad, the chain of narrators. It has the matan, the content. From this, later generations extrapolate, okay, these people must have known each other or lived in the same region, And because of the quality of their work, they're going to determine the credibility of their narrations. So first, the compilations of Hadith were made. Then, from the compilations of Hadith, they created the biographies. Now today, people, they take the biographies and they try to use that to confirm the Hadith, even though they came post facto, and it's from the Hadith that they created the biographies. And this is perfectly articulated in the following tweet from Balaam and Donkey, or I should say on X, who goes by the handle Balaam and Angel. It says, "Save years of your life. The reliability of a hadith hinges on the reliability of its narrators, but the reliability of the narrators hinges on the reliability of their hadith. It was always circular. This entire charade is a circular argument. Individuals created the hadith. They attach isnads to the hadith. Then later generations say, okay, well, these hadith are sound, so now let's create biographies to justify that these people lived at this time period, presume what their age was, and then because we trust the hadith, then therefore they're trustworthy narrators. The whole thing is a sham. The whole thing is a charade. Ilm al-Rijal is utter garbage. And it's funny because today, that's the way that they claim they authenticate hadith. They say, look, we have these books of biographies. You give me the name of any of these people, I will tell you if they were trustworthy. I will tell you where they resided, how old they were. And you realize the whole thing's a sham. There's no credibility to this because they're using the source, the hadith itself, to extrapolate these other information and then pointing back to the hadith to confirm what it is that they originally got. It reminds me of the days you would get a consultant. So you get a Fortune 500 company, and they would hire a consultant and they would pay him a ton of money to come and tell them what they already knew. And then they would use that to justify what it was that they already wanted to do. It's the same thing. They created a system to justify the very work that they're trying to prop up to give it credibility. The whole thing is a circular argument. It's all a sham. God willing, we're going to end there. If you want to get in contact, you want to find like-minded individuals, please join us on our Discord server. If you want to follow along the verse of the Quran, you want to get a better understanding of the meaning of the Quran, please download the Quran Study app on the iOS App Store. If you don't have an iOS device, you can go to QuranStudyApp.com website where you'll get the same information. If you want to get notes from today's discussion, you can go to Quran Talk blog where you can find notes from today's discussion along with the citations for my sources. As well as, articles on numerous other topics. And if you want more regular updates or, some nice memes, follow me on Twitter at Talk Quran. And until next time, peace and God bless.